real talk, I know that I'm like the last person that stands in your way of like drinking beer and taking naps or like, backing up your iPhone in preparation for tomorrow. But I will get through this, bear with me. So today we're going to talk about chatbots. If you're older than 6 months old, you've probably known the internet's infatuation with bots, like Greg mentioned. But thanks to Colin Kaepernick, the presidential candidates, and headphone jacks, I think we can now start talking about bots again. So I'm going to do that today. And what is a bot? So a bot is just a software program that simulates a conversation with a human being. An example of a fictitious bot that I made up is all bots do is they receive input from a human. They can process that information and give some information back. So here's a fictitious emoji bot that will read and analyze what somebody said and convert what they said into emoji. But bots are not new. So a long time ago, a man by the name of Alan Turing, he's a real human, not a bot, came up with the Turing test, as you guys are all aware. And the Turing test just simulated a conversation, and people needed to decide if that conversation was with a human or with a bot. And based on that work, in 1965, the first, what is known as like the first chatbot, arrived from the work that was inspired from Alan Turing, from a man named Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT, and he created ElizaBot, which simulated a psychotherapist. You would give it some symptoms, and it would try to diagnose you. And then fast forward to 1995, so a lot of things happened that were important in between there, like the invention of IRC. But we're going to get to the real important stuff. Does anybody know what this is? This is Microsoft Bob, which was an interface on top of a horrible interface. But it had this little dog in the corner. You may remember him from such operating systems as Windows XP. But it would watch what a user did and try to guide them through the horrible interface, which made way for, of course, in 97, it's the first thing everybody tried to turn off. And then in 2000, a company called ActiveBuddy created a bot called SmarterChild. And SmarterChild sat inside AOL Instant Messenger, and it sat inside MSN Messenger. And you could ask it things like, what's the weather? Is there any news? Things that you can say to your phone nowadays. Back in 2000, this company made this. And they actually made a launch video. And I need to show you this launch video. It's 4 minutes long. I'm just going to show you the first 10 seconds. It's pretty epic. I downloaded it from YouTube. You can get it from YouTube. It has some cursing in it, so earmuffs if you're not into that.
There's a reason why we've asked people to sign NDAs here, and there's a reason why we're asking people to be stealth-like. And the reason is that this is a big fucking idea. And what's interesting about this big fucking idea is it's like a lot of big fucking ideas. It's simple. It's a simple idea that everybody should have thought.
So that video is pretty awesome. It goes on for 4 minutes about how big. Everybody's like, yeah, this is a big fucking deal, and this is a big, and then it goes on 4 minutes like that. So you can watch the whole thing if you want. But then the bubble burst and kind of SmarterChild went away. But then in 2007, this application was an application for iPhone. Does anybody know what this is? This is the first version of Siri. This is, it was an application before Apple bought it and put it into their phones. You could type and say voice commands to it. And obviously, they sold to Apple, and now everybody cusses at it on their phones. Which brings us to today, 2016, where we have a plethora of platforms and services to help us build the next evolution of bots. But why should we care? As developers, we're all developers here, why should we care about building bots? How many people have a phone with 20 apps on it? How many people use like 3 of those apps? Right. So that's what everybody does, turns out. And the most popular apps on iOS, well, the most popular app is iMessage. Third-party apps, Facebook owns 2 of them. It's Facebook and Facebook Messenger, and Google owns a third one, which is YouTube. But people use these apps because they're familiar. People use text-based apps because they're familiar. It's just a text box, and they know that they're talking to something. And there's less barriers. It's already on your phone. People already know how to use it, and that's what people default to. And a company that has figured this out is Uber. So Uber, of course, has their Android and iOS apps. They even have Windows Phone and BlackBerry apps. But of course, they also have SMS, so you can order an Uber through SMS, and Slack, Facebook Messenger, HipChat. So their motto is be where the users are. So they're not trying to sell you an app, they're trying to sell you a service. So wherever that service is a good idea. And I think as developers, we can do that with our own apps. We may have our main app, but there may be an opportunity for a chat bot to help along, get more users, get more people using your apps. And the opportunity is huge. In '86, that's kind of the decade of box software, right? You would go into a Sears, since we're in Chicago. You go into a Sears, and you could buy, there'd be 60 titles of software on the shelf that you could buy. Now, the opportunity was huge, right? If you were on that shelf, you could sell millions and millions of dollars worth of software. But the barrier to entry was really high as well. You'd have to have a publisher, you'd have to somehow get on the store shelf. And then in '96, Al Gore and others created the internet. And again, it was a great opportunity. The barrier to entry was low, but the opportunity costs were also low because people had to wade through a bunch of crap that was on the internet to get to your application. Then in '06, really in '08, but it breaks my whole '06, my 6th theme going on here. So in '08, Apple released the App Store. And the opportunity was high in the beginning, right? You could make $1 million off of our apps. But and the barrier to entry was really low. Not as low as the internet, but pretty low. And now in '16, there's a new type of opportunity that we can take advantage of. The opportunity is very high, and the barrier to entry is very low. So it's a very good, lucrative, it could be a very lucrative business model. Also, these things to build, as you saw Greg's demo, they're fun as shit to build. You can build the things that you see in sci-fi. Text is a constraint, right? You're always working with text, and that could be very fun to do. It forces a lot of other design problems that you need to think about. It's just a new way of thinking. And you don't need to deal with CSS, which is a bonus. Okay, so I want to talk about a little bit about UI design for bots. So conversational user interfaces can be pretty challenging. Here's kind of an example of a bot that would schedule meetings. And this would be your new UI design, which is basically copy is very important, what you tell your users, and flow is very important. You need to guide your users to the correct flow, to the correct end goal that they want to achieve over text. So it's very important to think these things out ahead of time. And then this presents a lot of design challenges. One design challenge is discoverability. So on first contact with your users, you want to be very verbose. Right? Here's an example where you're asking them a question, and then you tell them that you can reply with yes or no. You can do that at first, initially, and then kind of take off those training wheels. Once your users start using your bot, you can take those off. So the next time, you can tell them, you don't need to add that verbosity. And then unlock features. So, right, your users just have a text box. How do they know what the hell they can do with your bot? You can give them clues on how to unlock other features. So here's an example that a meeting was scheduled. What's the next thing that they want to do? They may want to reschedule that. They may want to cancel that. So you can tell your users more information about what features are available for them. Validation is another very hard problem. So again, they just have a text box, so they can type whatever they want. So you have to handle that validation. And a good thing is to say 3 things. A, why that thing that they responded with was not valid. Repeat what they can do, and then repeat the question, because they've already forgotten what they've asked, or what you've asked them. And because nobody wants to scroll through a conversation in the middle of a conversation. It's an odd thing to do. Selection is another UI concern, right? There's no big, long drop-down lists in chatbots. So one good idea is to present them with options and let them narrow down those options. So here's an example of where do you want to meet. You want to meet at a coffee shop, a restaurant, or dinner, or local bar. Once they choose that, then you can reduce the options that they have there. It's kind of a good way to do that. Some best practices on building the personality of your bot. I prefer to stay gender neutral. Instead of referring to your bot as a he or she, refer to it as an it, have a gender neutral name. I'm all for gender specific bots, but it's very hard, and it's very hard not to offend those people, those groups of people, whether it's a male or female. So it's easier to stay gender neutral. Also, the Turing test is very, very hard. So there's another test called the beer test, and that's basically like you have this bot, and yeah, it kind of screws up every now and then, but you like to hang around with it. You know that it's not all roses. They're going to screw up from time to time, and that's cool. So go for the beer test, not the Turing test, unless you have a lot of money. Also, in order to make your bot feel a little more human, offer different responses. So if a user says something and you get them to a specific path, that end goal, or why they're going through that path, have different responses for them. Okay. Also, in most platforms, you know information about the user. You know their surroundings. You know where they're from. You know current affairs. You know what they did in the past. You know their local time and their weather. So you can use those to make your bot feel a little more personal. And always have a fallback. People, especially developers, they're going to start using your bot, and they're going to try to screw it up. So always have a fallback, and let that fallback have multiple responses. Don't always just say, I'm sorry, I didn't get your response, because people will try to break you. Okay. I'm going to talk about building the bots now. So if you have not installed a Slack bot, we're going to specifically talk about Slack, by the way. I'm going to quickly go through the user experience. Basically, somebody gets to a website. So in the Slack app directory, all that is just a list of bots that are already out there. And what it does, I'm going to just pick this random one just sitting there called Tatsu. And that just sends you to an HTTP endpoint. And usually at the HTTP endpoint, there's some sort of button that says sign up with Slack or add to Slack. Once the user clicks on that, it sends them back to Slack to OAuth the application with them. And if that application has a bot attached to it, you'll get this. I know the yellow is kind of hard to see, but it'll say add a bot user with whatever name your bot is. Once they click authorize, that sends them back to your application, where usually you say, hey, your bot's talking to you in Slack. And now your Slack instance now has that bot user in it. So bots are just like normal users. They're just bots. A quick note about install. I know Slack is working on the ability to install apps right through your, right through Slack. So that whole HTTP endpoint may go away soon, as far as installing the bot. And then usually what people do is they DM with the bot. So in Slack specifically, a bot cannot auto-join other channels. You as a human must invite them to other channels. But you can DM with the user that installed your bot. That's really it. And now you have a WebSocket from your application to Slack. That's really all bots are just WebSocket connections. So how do you build this? First thing you want to do is go to api.slack.com/application/new, and you can create whatever application you want. This isn't going into the app directory. This is just your local one. I also recommend you create a separate app for each environment that you're in. So you want to create a development one, a staging one if you have that, and a production one, because you're going to want to treat those apps differently. You can destroy things, you can test things, you can make changes to your development app. But on that note, Slack literally just released about an hour ago Way's new kind of Slack app directory procedure that you can go through where you have kind of a sandbox. So you may not need to do that. When you're creating the Slack app, if you've worked with OAuth before, you're going to have a redirect URI where you'll have to redirect after they authorize with Slack, after your users authorize with Slack. And obviously you can't put localhost 3000 in there, so this is a development environment. You can use, if nobody has heard of ngrok, basically ngrok can redirect traffic from a publicly accessible URL to your localhost at some port. There's also other ones like local tunnel, things like that. Okay, the other thing when you're creating your Slack app is you want to attach a bot user to it. So this is how Slack knows when somebody OAuths your application that there is a bot attached to this application. Okay, then you need some sort of web component, some starting point where the user can install your bot. And that's going to point to your OAuth implementation. So you can just point to /auth/Slack. And there is an OmniAuth, if you choose to use OmniAuth for your OAuth. There's an OmniAuth Slack gem that's pretty well maintained and good. And in your initializers, in your config, basically you put those, the client ID and the client secret that you get from Slack when you create your app. You put those in there, and then you just provide scopes. If you're just doing bot communication, you don't really need to know anything further about the user or about the messages or about the team. These are the only two scopes that you need. But Slack has like very well-defined scopes, very terse scopes that you can use depending on what your bot needs to do. They're very granular. Then this is just OAuth stuff, OmniAuth stuff. You can point your callback to some controller in action. And in your controller in action, OmniAuth puts the response that it got back from Slack inside request.env and then OmniAuth auth. This is an example of a response, but basically it has three important parts. It has the user ID of the person that installed the application, which is very important because you want to store that so you can DM with them later. It has the team ID, so this is the actual team that, this is like your subdomain at Slack. This is the Slack IDs for these. And then your bot info. So it has a bot user ID and the bot access token that you also need to store. Okay, and then you just need to start your bot. So you OAuth with your bot, with Slack. You have all the information. The next thing is to start your bot. There's a gem out there called Slack Ruby Client, which is just a API wrapper, or wrapper around Slack's API. It's really nice. And inside an event machine loop, you basically want to call this. This is from the Slack Ruby client. pass it in your bot access token, and call start async. And now you have an event machine connection where your application is the client, Slack is the server. Now, this is very oversimplified code. There's a lot of error conditions you want to check for in here. Slack will just randomly say, screw you connection, I don't care about you. They'll drop connections, they'll change the connection URLs. So there's a lot of error handling you want to check in here. And then the next thing is to talk to your user. So you started the process, and now you want to introduce your bot. So Slack's API, this chat post message, is the way to post a message to any channel that your bot has access to. But in this case, what we're doing is the line above it. I am open is opening a direct message connection with that user, and then you can communicate through that channel. Any questions on that stuff? Just yell out questions if you guys have them. Now to listen for events. So your client now has some event hooks that you can hook into, lots of them. The most important one is on a message. So in this example, I'm getting a message, and I'm just looking at the data, the text of that message, using some regex, and then responding to that message. And we're gonna talk about how this can be a lot smarter. And we're gonna do that now. So when you're building your bot, a really important thing to do is extract the whole connecting and receiving and sending messages out into a library. There are some gems out there that you can use to do this. But the whole point of that is similar to Rails, right? We extracted everything out of request and response cycle into Rails and made our app the business logic. You want to do the same thing with bots. And a good way to do that is to add behaviors. So as your bot becomes smarter and smarter over time, it's easier to add different behaviors that it can do based on the messages. So instead of having a case statement like this, which may be your hello world, I prefer to put behaviors inside modules. So as your bot becomes smarter and smarter, you can just add more modules for that bot. And the behaviors basically have three methods. Can it respond to this message? So like a can respond method. Does it pass that message on? So does it do something and then pass that message on to other behaviors? And then acting on that message. So that's kind of the API for behaviors. And it makes it easier to respond to a bunch of different behaviors. Now, we're going to talk really quick about natural language processing. So if anybody is familiar with natural language processing, basically you give a program a sentence, and that program gives you an intent back. So what is this sentence trying to accomplish? It gives you entities. So what are the things within that sentence that you act on? So in this case, it's going to give you a target of BB8 and a status of ready. And then it gives you a confidence level. So how confident is the program in determining what your intent was? And now, the cool thing is there's like 1 million of these services. So we don't have to build this stuff ourselves. I've used several of them in the past. I've used wit.ai, which was bought by Facebook. And we know what they did with parse, so use this if you want. I've since switched to like API.ai. I know. But basically, they all work the same. So you give the service some sort of sentence, and you parse out, you tell it what the intent is, and then you tell it what the entities are. And as you're building your bot, you want to log the messages that your bot's not handling, and always update the service. So if people are talking to the service in a different way, you can add more sentences and make your bot smarter. And then Wit has a Ruby gem API wrapper. Basically, it has a text query where you can just give it the sentence and your access token, and it will give you back a JSON response that's similar to this. That gives you your intent, your entities, and the confidence. So it's pretty simple stuff. So I encourage everyone to go out and start building bots. It's a lot of fun, even if you just do it within your own companies. Some resources that you can use. This is a Slack group for Slack developers. I know. But there's also Facebook developers in there, SMS, Twilio developers. The Facebook API team hangs out, the Slack API team hangs out in there. I believe Facebook API team does as well. So you can get answers to all your questions. Slack's API documents are really, really, really good. I recommend them. They have a Twitter account, Slack API team. They also have a Medium account that I would recommend. And then if you don't get enough email, there's a weekly newsletter called Bot Weekly that is pretty good. As a plug, if anybody does stand-up meetings and you don't want to get interrupted while doing them, you can check out Tatsu. Or if you just want to play around with how bots are working, you can check that out. And that's all I have for you. We have 3 minutes for questions. 3 minutes before we drink beer. 3 minutes before naps. Thank you.